It's been said among comic fans that while Marvel is largely kicking butt over DC with their live-action movies, DC is largely kicking Marvel's butt with their animated TV shows and direct-to-DVD animated movies. So like a lot of fans, I was upset that Cartoon Network and Warner Brothers Animation chose to cancel the very good Green Lantern the Animated Series and the excellent Young Justice, probably the best animated DC Universe series that has been done so far, and replace it with Teen Titans Go and Beware the Batman as part of their new DC Nation cartoon programming lineup. And also, in a bit of an unintentional bit of synchronicity, it would appear that Marvel has done something similar, replacing a good show with a lesser one. But more on this in a moment. First, I just want to briefly touch on Teen Titans Go. I've watched a few Teen Titans Go segments, and while I enjoyed the original DC Nation shorts, I have found the series to be subpar. The best analogy I can think of is that Looney Tunes made for great 6-minute shorts, but that doesn't mean that they necessarily translate well into full-fledged stories. I'm sure that many will tell me that I am not the audience for this show, but there is no denying that this show is trying to reach adults too by giving them some comedy that they can enjoy also. I will move on and say that for right now, the only reason I will be DVRing Titans Go is to see if there are any new DC Nation shorts that I want to watch. Now, Beware the Batman is doing a few things to distinguish itself from the previous Batman animated shows. It is being promised as a more procedural show, with more emphasis on Batman as the detective. 2, the show's producers say that Batman is going to be much more prone to getting physically hurt a lot more often than in previous versions, and this certainly is apparent in the show's opening episode. Now also, the character of Alfred Pennyworth has been reimagined as a former British MI6 agent. Alfred is a real bruiser in this show who can really take a larger role in helping Batman with his crime-fighting mission. This is very similar to the version of Alfred used in the recent parallel universe graphic novel Batman Earth 2, and I like this change. If this episode is any indication, I will enjoy seeing this version of Alfred as the series progresses. Now at the end of this episode, we are introduced to the DC Universe hero Tatsu Yamashiro, hopefully I said that right, aka Katana, originally from the Batman and the Outsiders comic from the 90s. The show's producers have already said that she will be Batman's Robin for this version of the character. But we don't see her till the very end of this episode, so I can't comment too much on her characterization yet. Now, compared to opening episodes of other DC Universe shows, Batman the Animated Series, Superman the Animated Series, Justice League, Green Lantern, and Young Justice, this is a fairly inauspicious debut, with the best thing about it being how the supporting cast characters like Alfred, Katana, and Lieutenant Jim Gordon are introduced to us. The villains for this episode are Professor Pig and Mr. Toad. While I am not familiar with these two villains from any comics that I have ever read, I do know that they were created by comics writer Grant Morrison and have been altered for this TV series. Since I'm not familiar with the source material of these two characters, I have nothing to compare them to. All I can say is that they are certainly over the top and come off as more violent versions of villains that might have been created for the Batman 60s TV show, and that might have been original creator Grant Morrison's intent. The series describes them as eco-terrorists, but I'm a little confused by the Mr. Toad character, what he is exactly. Professor P is clearly a man wearing a mask, but I'm confused as to what this Mr. Toad character is supposed to be. He doesn't appear to be a man wearing a suit. He appears to be an anthropomorphic cartoon frog, and seems completely out of place with the more realistic and darker aspects of the series. Is he an alien? Is he some kind of a mutation? Viewers like myself who aren't familiar with the source material for this character should be given some kind of clue as to what he's supposed to be, even if it's just in an expositional line of dialogue. At this point, I am completely neutral about these two characters. I don't dislike them, but I don't find them to be terribly notable or even fun as villains either. But we are clearly going to see more of them, so we'll see how the show progresses. The show's producers have also said that they are deliberately staying away from major villains like the Joker, Catwoman, and Two-Face. This is clearly another move to distinguish themselves from previous Batman animated shows, but whether this will provide more fertile ground for telling stories remains to be seen. The rest of the episode comes off as fairly pedestrian. Most DC Universe animated shows debut with a two-parter or even sometimes three-parter or more in order to give more room for story development and to have room to introduce us to all the characters. Even though this episode comes off as average, it is still much more worth continued watching than what I have seen from Avengers Assemble. Like a lot of comic fans, I downloaded the two-part sneak preview of this show to my iPad. After the first 10 minutes, I turned it off and said, I'll get to it later. I never did go back to it, and instead decided to watch episode 3, the show's TV premiere episode. To the writer's credit, I didn't need to watch the two-part opening to enjoy episode 3, which is not to say that I enjoyed it much. In this episode, it's New Avengers recruit the Falcon's first official day as an Avenger. And the show's opening minutes has the Avengers literally fighting over a box of homemade cookies that the Falcon has brought to share with his teammates on his first day. This attempt at humor falls completely flat, and even worse, they go back to it to wrap up at the end of the episode. Now, the rest of the plot, in the meantime, deals with an army of ghost aliens from another dimension. These ghost aliens can replicate not only human biology, but tech as well. So one by one, they begin to kidnap each Avenger and duplicate and replace them as a precursor to a full-scale invasion. The first part of the story arc has Falcon as the only real Avenger left trying to stop the duplicate Avengers by himself. Now, I've read crazier things in superhero comics before, but this plot is just loaded with ridiculous plot holes. The real Avengers are, for instance, in the Ghost Dimension, where they fight off the hordes of ghost aliens that are still trying to come into our dimension via a large portal that is standing between them and our world. Tony Stark explains that while they are in the Ghost Dimension, they can physically interact with these ghost aliens as if they were physical. So the Hulk starts pounding on them one by one in order to fight them off. So do the rest of the Avengers. Then, at the end of the episode, when they suddenly need to get them all out of the way at once so they can come into our world, the Hulk just does one of his sonic wave Hulk slaps that he does and knocks them all out of action at once. Well, then why didn't you just do that in the first place earlier on? But even worse, if the ghost aliens can pass through this portal into our world, what's stopping the real Avengers from just going through that portal themselves and helping the Falcon fight the duplicate Avengers? It's never really explained. I could go on with more examples of this, but hopefully you get the idea. The entire episode is just full of these kind of just obvious plot holes that just kind of stare at you. Prior to this series, Marvel was producing the Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes. This series ran from 2010 to 2012. And like Young Justice and Green Lantern, the animated series, this series was canceled in order for Marvel to give us a show that was more of an animated continuation of the successful Avengers movie. This show also aired, the previous Avengers series, I should say, also aired at the same time as the aforementioned DC Universe shows too, Young Justice and Green Lantern. It wasn't as good as Green Lantern or Young Justice, but it was at least enjoyable, and it managed to capture a lot of the fun of the 60s Silver Age Avengers comics. And speaking of trying to be a continuation of the Avengers movie, the writing and the voice actor playing Iron Man / Tony Stark did a much better job of approximating the tone and swagger of Robert Downey Jr. than this current show has. I can say that I will be watching future episodes of Beware the Batman, and at least for a while longer to see how it pans out. And it might be interesting to do a follow-up review after either mid-season or at least at season's end, and examine how the show has grown or not grown since the series opener. But at this point, I have no desire to continue watching Avengers Assemble, and would instead recommend that fans of the movie watch the previous 2010-2012 series, Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes. So, have you watched these shows? Tell me what you think. Thanks for listening. Please subscribe.